I'd like to say hello. My name is May Mangles, and let's introduce everybody. Mark?
Hey, I'm Mark Sacknoff.
And I'm Kevin Baker.
And the three of us have come together because, number one, we're friends. It's kind of an unusual, colorful group, wouldn't you say? But also the opportunity to deal with the discomforts, the edgy feelings of talking about racism today in America.
Welcome to Detangling Perspectives. I'm your host, Kevin Baker. Are you ready to engage in meaningful healing work, both inside and out? This is an invitation to slow down, to breathe, and look inward. We will explore socialization, history, family, culture, and how they have shaped us, and how we can rewrite those stories with empathy, responsibility, and courage. This is not about blame or perfection. It's about becoming more human together. So wherever you are in your journey, I'm glad you're here. Welcome again to Detangling Perspectives. Let's begin. Drop.
And now to set the intention. And I'll ask Kevin to make sure that we have enough sage to hold us through this. And as we clear this space right now to set the intention that everything we say and do today here is for the greatest and highest good of all. We thank our ancestors of our past and our present and those who are yet to come. We thank our guides from known and unknown sources as they help lead us to brave space. We thank you all for being with us.
Thanks, May. All right, Kevin. Well, we picked a kind of a weighty topic this time, stereotyping.
Stereotyping.
Well, I thought I would kick it off by reading the dictionary definition of stereotype.
Great.
And that is, it is a noun and the first definition, well, there's a definition about a relief cast printing plate made from a mold, but we're not talking about that kind of stereotype. We're talking about what they define as a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing, as in the stereotype of the woman as the carer, or the stereotype of the city is too easily stereotyped as an industrial wasteland.
Wow.
And thank you. And those are fairly neutral. There was one that's gender-based and one that's societal-based. But oftentimes what comes up when we think about stereotypes is race, right? Race and ethnicity. So something that I have is that, everyone is aware of stereotypes, right? Although most of us don't believe in them, they're often held on an unconscious level. And we've been bombarded so much from media, from messages that we got from family growing up, from messages that we got from school, that it just shows up often on an unconscious level. We'll be riding down the street, we look over, we see someone, and this thought just pops up into our mind. And often as quickly as it comes up, it's gone. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I have found so interesting when doing workshops and doing activities around stereotypes is it always starts out very slow. When you gather people and you say, okay, here are 5 or 6 sheets of paper. We want you to write all of the stereotypes that come to mind when you think about Black people, when you think about white people, when you think about Asian people, when you think about Latinx people, when you think about indigenous peoples, right? And we head them with all of those titles and put people in groups, generally mix mixed groups, right? So it's different people of different races in each group. And it always starts out very slow where, you know, people are very hesitant to speak up and say, right? So generally someone will throw one out there and then another person will throw another one out there. And it's moving so slow that you don't think that you can even fill up a page. But as people grow more comfortable with each other and begin to express themselves, you end up having 3 pages on each group, right? Of all of the stereotypes that we know of that comes up to our conscious level when we call them, right? When we call it up. So it's something that we all have, something that we all carry. Is how do we be aware of those stereotypes and then recognize them when it comes up from our unconscious mind into our consciousness, and then begin to question that thought and where did it come from?
What do you think, Emma?
Yes, I eat rice and I am really shitty at math. So I kind of messed up that stereotype. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate that very much. And you're right. It's subconscious to conscious. And I'm wondering if that's what's happening right now. Look at today's headlines about Florida and about Texas. And now they're saying there's going to be legislation about not changing the current conditions of the school systems, of adding or changing the viewpoints of racism. And I'm wondering, is it because they just don't know what to say? They just don't know what the new truth is, the new truth.
You know, I think one is fear-based. And what happens if white people give up all of the false stories that they've learned? There's an African proverb, and I'm not going to get it 100% correct, right? But it goes something like, until the lion tells his tale, the story will always glorify the hunter.
Well, who are these lions? Who are these white people? I don't get it. Actually, I'm having a little fit here.
Well, the lion in this case is actually those that are oppressed. The hunter is the white person in that metaphor.
Yeah. And so so you're talking about teaching critical race theory. We've jumped from stereotypes to critical race theory. I'm going to suggest we put a pin in this critical race theory until we get a little farther into stereotypes, because I think there's a lot of value in understanding what Kevin was saying. I know myself that when I think about, if I see, when I live in Chicago, if I saw a group of young Black men standing on the street corner, I would immediately think, oh, trouble. I bet they're gang members. Or if I saw, or even some of the stupid sexist ones like dumb blondes, or, or as Enme was saying about smart, mathematical Asian people. I mean, we could go down and through all these different ones. And I think there's value in calling them out, because if we don't call them out, then people don't realize that they're at play, And what the part of this that I find so confounding is how there are so many oppositional stereotypes, especially about Black people. They're lazy, but they're dangerous. They're stupid, but they're superhuman, like Kobe Bryant or Kareem or whoever. And it's like, well, how can they be both? I don't get it. So the whole, and then this whole idea. Well, of course, there are lots of stereotypes about Jewish people being greedy, or being money grubbers or whatever, and so on. And so we can pick whatever ethnic group we want and find, as Kevin says, some stereotypes that someone else might be holding about them. But Kevin, so once you surface these things, how do you diffuse them?
With the conscious awareness that this stereotype has just popped in my mind, first you have to identify it as a stereotype, right? And then question, where did that thought come from? right? Where did it come up in my mind? And then when did it become a part of my belief system? And then what do I now do about it, right? Do I have to go back and look at what happened in my childhood? As you just stated, Mark, if you were, riding down the street, you saw Black folks on the corner and you went to gang members, like where did that thought come from? How did that get into your head, right? Was it media? Was it the news? Where? Where did it come from? Was it family? One of the things that I would tell people often is when you watch the news, and I really don't watch the news a whole lot anymore, so I don't know how true it is today, if it still holds true or not. But years ago, and maybe not too long ago, when you watch the news, if they talked about any crime, if the person who committed the crime was white, they would just talk about the crime and you would never see the person.
Right.
If the person that committed the crime was Black, they would always show the picture of the person. Mm-hmm. So after you see that repetitively so often, that you begin to think that any crime that's committed, and even if you don't see a picture, that it's a Black person, right? There's something called false memory. And with false memory, if there's 5 events that causes an action, with false memory, only thing you need is 3 of those events. The mind will automatically implant the other 2. Right? So we have to be so aware of where these thoughts come from, how they come up, and then question it. Mm-hmm. Right? It's about what happens in that split second where we go from thought to action, mm-hmm. right? Or reaction. And oftentimes we react to stuff instead of responding, right? We need to learn to respond. And that means that you pause in that second and you take everything and look at everything that goes across your mind and evaluate it and analyze it before you take action.
Mm-hmm. That's asking a lot, Kevin. I mean, in modern society, somebody honks at you or cuts you off, and I don't stop and think, oh, are they having a bad day? Before I react, whatever my reaction is. Now, of course, nowadays that can be deadly, as we discovered this young child shot from behind by some crazy
tragedy.
Yeah, super tragedy. And so, but I also think, I mean, we're coming out of COVID and we're coming out of lockdown. So most of us have not had a lot of interaction with other people. And the interaction that we have had has been masked. So we don't really know what people are saying. We barely can hear what they're saying, let alone know what they're thinking, because we're not seeing their full reaction, right? Because they're masked up. And so in a sense, you might say this is an opportunity to hit a reset button and ask ourselves, what are these assumptions? My friend used to say, right, the assumption makes an ass of you and me, right? That these assumptions that we're making about other people, which may be based on stereotypes, and some of those stereotypes are absolutely intentionally planted to create a specific response among certain people. And we go back to Willie Horton in the, with George Bush Sr. in the Republican election about demonizing, all Black men as criminals that helped set up this, school to prison pipeline that we're now has created such a terrible problem in our country. But when I see a Black guy on the street, at night, I'm not thinking, I wonder if that's really Willie Horton, or I'm wondering if that's just some poor guy who's out like me, trying to find his dog, or trying to find an open place to buy some Pampers when my kids were small or something. I mean, I don't know that, you're asking a lot of people to stop and actually think through a process. So I'm asking you, like, okay, so what's the shortcut here? What's a way for people to be able to quickly short circuit those stereotypes without having to go through a master's thesis program?
Well, I don't believe a master's thesis program is necessary, but I
Well,
also
that's a
love
relief.
it. I also love it when white people ask for a tool, right? And ask for the shortcut, right? Because there is no shortcut to actually doing the work, right? And that's the thing, right? We want it quick, we want it easy, and oftentimes we want it without doing the personal work, right? What we're talking about is everyone doing their own personal work, right, around this.
I'm with you. And I'll take it one step more, which is I know some white people I know what they want is they want the black person to say, I'm not a risk to you. Don't worry about me. They want to put it on them. It's like, hey, I just want you to know, I'm just doing my thing. I'm not,
right. And
I'm not a threat. Like somehow that has to be broadcast.
Well, and the thing is, who is the threat, right? Because I'm scared of white people sometimes. When we look at all of these mass shootings that's happening, when you're in the workplace, if somebody white gets mad, you have to be scared, because what are they going to do? Are they going to come back and shoot everyone? Right. But again, is this a stereotype or is this a pattern that we see? Right. And those are the things that often we have to look at.
Well,
this is the first time that I've felt a little intimidated, let's call it, by the white person. I married a white person, but if I'm shopping someplace and in the parking lot, I might come across somebody who's showing me a glint of pain or distress, anger, mostly raised because of this recent condition of COVID. And where did COVID come from? I'm often targeted being that Asian face behind the mask that I brought it here. So some of this I understand and realize that this is from the conditions that were created in media, in a particular leader of our country who was now out of the office. And those types of voices that they received from whatever rhetoric or political conditions that they believed. I refer to myself in an interesting way. I'm half Chinese, half Japanese, and as a result of a swab test, I'm a little bit Korean. That's a new one on me because I already had a big problem of being half of something and half of another thing. And it was like, not enough of this and not enough of that. So it's fitting in within my own race is also a condition of a kind of a stereotype. At the holidays, there's the Japanese New Year and there's the American New Year, both of which use a lot of champagne and sound makers and fireworks, and we would do that. And then here comes Chinese New Year's, and that's going to go see the dragons and so forth on the parade in February. As a child, we'd go there. At 6, 7 years old, my dad would take us, and our elders would give us little red envelopes with little coins in it for good wishes for the new year. We walked down the street of a party in where the parade was being held and went to visit a few elders. So we would always call them uncles and aunties. So for some reason, the little Chinese kids that were ahead of us would get their little red envelopes and they would know there's money in there and be so excited. We got excited, like, oh boy, my sisters said, here comes the money. We didn't get the envelopes. And my father would ask these elders, how come my children didn't receive these? Well, your children, Mr. Chu, are not Chinese. They're only half Chinese. We got in the car real fast. We were at McDonald's in no time. And he said, we don't have to do these parades anymore. You're American. You're born here. You live here. Let's be American. That was an early sign of kind of something that I call hereditary hostage, in that here was a set of beliefs that now I had to interpret as my truth. And I suppose it's time for everyone to look at their truth. I formed a racist thought in my head right there, I formed a racist thought. I'm 6. I'm imagining what my Black brothers and sisters are forming in their heads, living in a white world.
Well, I would respectfully say that you formed a prejudiced thought and not a racist thought.
So what's the difference?
Well, with racism, or that racist thought is you have to hold institutional or power in order to impact someone's life on the institutional and society level. I think all of us hold prejudices, but all of us don't have the institutional power or the systemic power to impact others' lives. I
So
think
did prejudice start the power of racism?
I believe it did. I believe it did. I think again, it's taking that prejudiced thought, and when you add power to it, the power to impact someone else's life, that's when the racist part comes in. And I would say that institutional and situational power institutional power is different from situational power. Situational power is more if I'm a supervisor on a job, right? Or that's positional power, right? That's different than holding power on a societal level. And I think an example that we used before was, Amy in Central Park. When the Black man said something to her and she called the police and believed that the police were there to protect her, she exercised her institutional power to impact someone else's life. If Mark and I were standing outside of a factory and I was Mark's supervisor in the factory, meaning I had positional power. If we were both standing outside, now I'm his supervisor and Mark slaps me. If I call the police, when the police arrive, who do you believe they're gonna talk to first? Right? It's gonna be Mark because he's the white guy standing there. Right. So that's more institutional power. We see it all the time. I think the word or the term that's been used, and maybe this is a stereotype too, right? Because we've gotten the name Karen. Right. And I know all the other women named Karen are probably a little pissed off right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Because now well, you got a meme, right? Because it became a social media meme that becomes a stereotype.
Absolutely.
That feeds into a stereotype.
Absolutely.
I have a Karen Kwan who is a relative of mine. She is a House of Representative member for the state of Utah. And she hates this, that the name Karen has become quite
that's
the meme.
Unfair.
Right.
That's unfair.
Right. Absolutely it
She's
is.
Chinese.
Absolutely it is.
Yeah.
Right. But it goes back to white people believing that they have not even believing that, knowing that they have the power of the institution behind them and doing things. We've seen it with, Black people barbecuing in the park and someone walks up and says that y'all need to stop or leave or something, but it's really white people believing that they have control over Black people, right? And that they have absolute authority in the society. And to some extent, it's true. We see it all the time.
Yeah.
I'd bring my sushi platter and go, let's share. Are you kidding?
Yeah. Thanks, then, May.
Yeah. If that's your heart.
Yeah.
Oftentimes that's not the heart that's being
because that's the point of the stereotype in certain ways is just lazy shortcutting. It's like, okay, so if Mexicans are all drunks, they're all borrachos, then maybe, but that's, even when you say them out loud, they're so absurd. They're so strange, but yet, when they, as you say, when they're repeated, we learned the big lie. The Nazis did fabulous brainwashing with the big lie.
Absolutely.
Fabulous is probably the wrong word. Diabolical is probably the right word, but that kind of brainwashing takes a lot of undoing. I'll tell you an example, which is that when I was growing up in Chicago, in the Chicago area, we used to tell jokes, and in those days, kids would tell jokes and adults would tell jokes, and then we would retell them. And the brunt of these jokes were Polish people, who we call Polacks. And I know Polish people don't like that term. And so, that they were always about, and even my dog doesn't like them. So they were always about how dumb people of Polish descent were. We got to understand, Chicago was like a third Polish at that time. So
Yeah.
where these came from, I don't know. But anyway, we would tell these jokes, and they were just ha 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 ha. And I didn't even know any Polish people, that at least that I was aware of. So you fast forward 10 years later, and I am a student teacher in Kaukauna, Wisconsin, in Kaukauna High School. And every Friday after school, the teachers would go to a bar and drink and talk about the week and whatever. And they would also tell jokes. And what was amazing is that they told the identical, I mean, literally one after another, the same jokes that I heard when I was in middle school and elementary school about Polish people. But in this case, now the brunt of these jokes, of these identical jokes, was Jews. And suddenly I had a little awakening about scapegoating, stereotyping, and racism and prejudice, really. And so, of course, I had to quickly come up with a bunch of pro-Jewish jokes, which was a whole nother issue. But also it was a surprise to my co-teachers, since I was a student teacher from the local college, that I was actually Jewish, because you don't know. They didn't know. And so they didn't even realize that they were being insensitive. But of course, I didn't realize that I was being insensitive and prejudiced. And so that really opened my eyes. And I think that kind of counter programming, so to speak, of personal experience helped me realize, how prejudice and stereotyping, how quickly it can lead to scapegoating and beyond.
Absolutely.
Which becomes really dangerous.
And it's so dangerous that, it causes violence, imprisonment, death, and, cutting off opportunities for people to have a productive life, right? That's what it's really meant for Black people, because it's impacted, everywhere that Black people go, right? If you're applying for a job, if you're going to get groceries, if you're going into the store. I remember when we first had when the mask mandate came out, Black folks was like, especially Black men, was like, oh my God, wear a mask and go into a store? What's going to happen to me? Right. And I think there was even some examples of, I think it happened in Walmart where, a Black man was harassed because he refused to take off a mask when he's trying to be safe.
Yeah.
Right. So, stereotypes do impact our lives so much. And they come up in this society, and they are everywhere, which I think, maybe this is a good time to go to critical race theory, because that's really about teaching the actual facts of the history of this country, of the United States of America, and how things actually came to be, right? When we think about, this mindset, this racist mindset being set up and started 500 years ago, before this country was even started, it had hit the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then how it moved forward. And now my belief is that white people don't want critical race theory taught in schools, because what does that mean for them? For the truth about how white people have shown up in this country and how they have treated Black and brown and indigenous peoples. Right? What does that mean? And is the threat the loss of privilege? The loss of power?
I mean, this one is a mind bender for me, because it's like, I was a history major, and the purpose of history is to try and discover the truth, but history is written by the victors, and we know this time and time again. And so, And then this critical, this whole idea of that we're not going to do the 1619 project, or we're not going to, teach about the actual history of our nation. I find so confounding because, as a historian, if you don't study history, then you're, who was it? George Satiano who said, if you don't study history, you are doomed to repeat it. And we only have to look across the ocean to Germany, right? I mean, Germany, the purveyor of Nazism, defeated. And instead of pretending that Nazism never existed, every school child in Germany learns about Nazism. Now, sure, there's still a rise of neo-Nazis and skinheads and stuff. But that's a tiny minority. Well, I don't know the exact number, so I don't want to say, because I know that there's been growing interest in, anti-immigrant skinhead groups in Eastern Europe. But the point that I'm trying to make is they didn't pretend it didn't happen.
Right.
They didn't just like cut the chapter out of the frickin' book and pretend that Germany went from losing the First World War to becoming a modern democracy. No, they teach about Nazism and what happened. Now, you can't glorify it. There are lots of laws in Germany against glorifying Nazism, which is really weird because there are no laws in America against glorifying the Confederacy.
We have statues. Yeah. Finally, there's been some moves to remove them.
Yes, but for years we've been glorifying the Confederacy. And Absolutely. To the point, and again, you want to talk about stereotyping, the Confederates have been, instead of being called what they were, which were treasonous, insurgents who wanted to destroy the United States Union and overthrow the Constitution and create a separate, country. Instead, there's some kind of romantic lost, antebellum bullshit that I don't know why anybody even comes close to buying that, and that slavery wasn't that bad and most slaves were well treated. And it's sort of like saying most people in concentration camps in Nazi Germany were happy to be there. It's just absurd. It's so absurd that, again, and so to even get on the defensive of that kind of stuff, it reminds me, and I'm going to go on my diatribe just a little bit longer here, which was when I was growing up. I went to school in Evanston, Illinois, which was a very progressive and integrated place, which was a wonderful thing. But there was a huge fight. There was a huge fight over two things. One was fluoridating the water, which the John Birch Society said was a communist plot, but certainly saved my parents a lot of dental bills. And the second thing was this, this whole idea of communism and socialism, and that you shouldn't teach about the history of certain countries or the labor movement in America because it would implant dangerous ideas in young minds. And the next thing you know, but then what happened was the 60s and people were rebelling against everything anyway. So it was a stupid and completely useless and completely boneheaded idea. And as a historian, as a history major, the one thing that I've learned is it's the free flow of ideas that allows people, to understand what is real and what is false, what is positive and what is negative, and to pretend that these things didn't happen or to make up some bullshit to cover for it. It's not just egregious. It's actually, it's detrimental to the moral fabric of the nation, I would say.
Well, here's a thought, right? Because you started out saying that if you don't know your history, then you're doomed to repeat your history. Maybe that's the point. Maybe there's a desire to repeat history, right? When we look at what's happening in our society today with the voting rights being rolled back, right? If this is a democracy, it would, if it was my words, true democracy, it would seem absurd to try to take away people's voting rights. We should be making it easy for people to vote, not making it harder, right? So is there really a move to bring back the ways of the old South?
Oh, God.
Right now, something that I learned recently, and this is part of the reason that I'm really glad we're having this conversation, is suppression does not equal liberation. Meaning we got here a few years ago, and a lot of us really thought of, what did we talk about before? Post-racialism, right? That racism no longer existed in America. Ha, that's a farce, right? We know that isn't true. And then this what we call the resurgence and this racist ideology, and finding the 70 or 80 million people who have these views, who are putting forward the stuff about stopping critical race theory, right? No, we don't want to know the truth about our country. We don't want to know the truth about what our founders did, right?
Oh, we don't want to know about the genocide of the Black population in Tulsa.
And that is one of many, right? One of many genocides that happened, right? And why? This loss of privilege, and are we experiencing a rollback in our rights?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, Kevin, because you cover two different things. One is about what are we teaching, and the other thing is what's the underlying intention about those who may be in power. And so the underlying intention of all people who are in power is to not give up their power to anybody else. Right. In general, that people do not give up power easily or freely, except in very rare occasions. But in this case, I think that what we're talking about is not just some kind of neo-romanticism about the old South. What I think is that I don't know, is it guilt? Is it white guilt? Is it intentional? Is it an intention to try and reimpose institutionalized racism and sort of the whole new Jim Crow concept that some writers
not reimpose? It ain't never gone anywhere.
Well, then if it ain't ever gone, then is this a fight to retain the last vestiges of it, in some way? And then, if you're a white person in America and everybody keeps telling you, which by the way is just race baiting, that, whites are going to be a minority in this country in the next 15 or 20 years, then, are you like in a desperate gambit to try and hold on to what? And who is behind that? So, I mean, if you're the Koch brothers, you actually have something to hold on to, which is your ability to influence and control the levers of power. But if you're just some white guy on, like the guys that I went to high school with who are working in a Ford plant or something, what is it you're trying to hold on to? I don't get it. Or you're in the military. What is it you're trying to hold on to through this whole thing? And that's where the stereotyping of other people or other groups of people that leads to scapegoating. That's where we get little old Asian ladies getting pushed onto the sidewalk or struck and killed in Oakland and places like that. That's when it becomes really dangerous,
Well, I mean, why do white people feel like stuff is being taken away from them? If this is a democracy, if this is a quote unquote salad, I think we've moved away from the term melting pot, right? But so if this is a big salad where all of us can show up and be ourselves, what's the threat?
Well,
what's the threat?
I don't know. But first of all, that metaphor, the melting pot metaphor, that ain't working. Right. And then, the salad metaphor, the tossed salad, but it's really more like oil and water. I don't know if you ever had a Long Island iced tea, but I was a bartender once, and the Long Island.
I was too.
Yeah, well, and you have to pour these liquids in at a certain. You have to start with a certain one and then keep adding them at certain levels of viscosity, right? But eventually, the person who buys it's going to try and stir it up, but they want to see all those levels, all those different, ingredients. And in a sense, our country is sort of like that. Now you have to decide whether who's at the bottom and who's at the top, but there's absolutely a pecking order in this country, and we absolutely are not a melting pot. If we're a salad, we're a poorly tossed one. And I'm not saying we're a Long Island iced tea. Maybe that's a dumb metaphor too, but but we are
Well,
a lot of people's coexisting, different groups coexisting, whose lives are in many ways not intersecting at all until something either really bad happens or really good happens. Example is, like in certain parts of New York, certain boroughs in New York, where you have Orthodox Jews and then you have Black people, and their lives totally didn't intersect until this Orthodox Jewish woman killed a Black pedestrian. Now, this was some years ago. And then suddenly you have this explosion. Or in Los Angeles, where I used to live, in Koreatown, or in where all the grocery stores are owned by different again, that's a stereotype. I was going to say all the grocery stores are owned by Koreans, maybe, or whatever, but many grocery stores owned by Korean people, and a Korean woman shot a young Black woman for shoplifting, and that caused an explosion because there were these two groups that simply they were barely intersecting, let alone mixing. And when they do intersect, it's with friction. And when that friction happens, that's when we see this explosion, but that means there's no communication going on.
absolutely. Absolutely. And the Long Island iced tea is perhaps the way to always get there quick, right? Which is what we always see in our society, right? The need to get there quick. Dump a whole lot of alcohol in your body and you're there, right? Yeah. What are your thoughts, May?
I'm pissed. The U.S. Declaration of Independence, a document written by white men for the white privileged, says something about all men are created equal. I have a problem with this document. It's inaccurate. It has been performed inaccurate. And it's shameful.
Absolutely.
Shameful. And I believe that, I'm only one person and I can only do my micro advocacy and I hope that everyone will take an opportunity to share stories with our grandchildren, talk to them, talk to kids, talk to people at your workplace, talk, converse, communicate what does feel uncomfortable. I would be often asked by even the Asian population, "Oh, are you Chinese?" I said, "Do I look like I'm a bag of rice?" I'm not sure how to answer that question anymore. I don't know how to do it without being pissed off, pissed on, or proud.
And I really feel that and understand it because as a light-skinned, curly-haired Black male, right? If I'm in Florida or Texas, they don't know what I am and just don't like me. They don't know if I'm Mexican. They don't know if I'm Puerto Rican. They don't know if I'm Black. They don't know what I am. And it's like, well, we just don't like you anyway, right? And then the one of the things in the Black community that happens a lot is colorism.
Mm.
And it's a big issue.
Yes.
It's a big issue that we have to be dealt with. But again, that's another issue that stems up from enslavement.
Yeah.
Right. With pitting us against each other.
Yeah.
Right. And then the quote unquote privilege that comes with being the lighter you are, the closer you get to white. When I was 12 years old, the song of the day was Play That Funky Music, White Boy.
Mm-hmm.
And, I loved the dance of the song, but I really hated it because
By the average white band.
That's right.
By the average white band, right? Is because being light-skinned, curly-haired at that time, and I talked proper, right? So it was often you acting white, right? So I actually did a whole lot of things to reject that, right? I rejected education. I didn't apply myself. Right. I started using a lot of slang and trying to talk hip and cool, right? Because I wanted to identify with my Black heritage, right? And I went to all of those stereotypes that I had learned at 12 years old and started playing them all out for acceptance, right? And that's just my story. And there are many similar stories, just as my other darker brothers and sisters have stories of their experience and how they have felt. And, and not even beginning to touch, as you just touched on and made the whole thing about mixed race. And how does that come up and what is the impact of that? Right. Now even mixed race is on our census. And it's been, that's another issue that has plagued our country. And the only shift that I've seen basically in the whole mixed race conversation is that at one time, white men were having the mixed race babies. And today there's more white women having mixed race babies. Right. And I mean, the mother loves their child and they do as much as they can, to protect their child. But, when the one drop rule was in effect when white men were raping their enslaved African women, right, and having children, right. And today it's something different. Right. And, we get in this as topics that we have to talk about, that we have to deal with. Identity is big. Identity is the biggest thing that really impacts our self-efficacy and how we show up in the world. Right. So that's a topic that we have to get into another day, maybe.
Yes. Yeah. For sure.
That might be the right time for us to book out today. We've hit on some very heavily pulsating conversation about racism. And today in particular about prejudice and stereotyping. Kevin, thank you for educating us. And I hope that we all get a chance to spread whatever message we can and in whatever little way we can. Get to know our neighbors, get to know the people who are right in front of us. I think that with questioning and the opportunity to know more, just mostly it's not to be scared of asking.
Yes. And we're all educating each other.
Right?
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, Mark, you're brave enough to be the white guy here so we can take a stab at.
Hey, you know what? I feel super fortunate to be able to have these conversations with the two of you, because I know so many other white people would love to just be able to ask these kind of questions of someone, and they're either afraid or they don't know someone, or they know them, but it's at work. And is that weird? Or they feel, they've got that whole, fear and fragility and guilt. And not that I don't have all those things, but at least I have this venue and this opportunity, which I think is so fortunate, and to be able to share this with others. Some people may hate what we're doing, but I believe that without dialogue, there's no way to change these intractable problems that we're facing as a society. That without dialogue, we're not going to get there. Laws alone are not going to do it.
Absolutely. We have to work on people's hearts and minds.
Kevin, maybe you have some materials that you'll be able to share in a link on critical race theory, and even perhaps papers that you've written yourself. So I hope you'll share those links in our YouTube comments. And we encourage comments from everyone let's chat about this. And if you do have questions, we're ready to hear them, and we want to hear them. So thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you. And let's look forward to more conversations in our brave spaces to Peace Bridge.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Sun May.
Yeah, thank you.
See you later.
Drop.